Does including diet breaks help people lose more body weight? And remember, they're using this under the philosophy that the reason people don't continually lose weight or don't lose as much weight is because their metabolisms are slowing down during a diet. And we can talk about that at the end. So they had two groups. They had a continuous group and they had a what I'm going to call a diet break group. Now, the top part of this figure describes the continuous group. This was the group of subjects that never went on a diet or that never took a diet break. What they did was they had 16 straight weeks in the middle after a 4-week break-in period. And at the end, they had a 5-week post-diet period. But we're really focused on the middle part of the 16 weeks of continuous dieting. The diet break group in the bottom part of this figure, they also dieted for 16 weeks, but after every 2 weeks of dieting, they took a 2-week diet break where they brought their calories back to maintenance calorie levels. So they dieted 2 weeks, then took a diet break for 2 weeks, dieted 2 more weeks, then took a diet break for 2 weeks. And this repeated until they had dieted for 16 total weeks. But because they kept adding in diet breaks, their total study duration was 30, let's just say the double amount of time to get in 16 total weeks of dieting. Now look on the left-hand side, here's the results. There's 2 lines on the left figure. The dashed line was the group that never took any diet breaks. The solid line was the diet break group, and you'll notice that over the length of these 16 weeks of dieting, they lost significantly more body weight. And on the right side, what you're looking at is what happened to body weight only in the diet break group, what happened when they were dieting, so that's the black solid bars, and then what happened to their body weight when they were on all of these diet breaks, that's the open bars. And you'll see that sometimes during diet breaks, they lost weight, and it really wasn't until the end of the intervention where the diet breaks caused some weight gain. But the left-hand side of this is the focus of the success of this diet. They lost significantly more body weight. Here's the raw data. They lost about 10 more pounds of weight. You could say 50% more body fat, 8 versus 12 kilograms. All subjects maintained their fat-free mass or their lean muscle mass relatively well. And there was no resistance exercise component to this study, so we wouldn't expect them to maintain it all or to gain any. And the other thing was the metabolic rate was also better in the intermittent dieting group. So again, when this study was published, brought a lot of focus, a lot of attention to diet breaks in general, because never before, like the previous study, what I call the mistake diet break study, that didn't show that diet breaks were better than not taking diet breaks. It showed that diet breaks didn't cause any harm. It didn't cause subjects to gain more weight with their inclusion. This study actually showed that it caused significantly more fat loss. And this was the first time this was reported. So again, we're calling this weight loss efficiency. The longer they dieted, they kept losing just as much or much more body fat in weight loss compared to not taking the diet breaks. This was another study that was in individuals with obesity. So now we have 2 studies like that, but no studies in people who are fit, people who exercise and lift weights. So that leads me to the last 2 studies that I'm going to summarize, one from my lab and one from another lab. Actually, the research was conducted in Australia. And both of these studies were in resistance-trained individuals, males and females in one case and resistance-trained females in the other case. So once we look at these are really going to give us a lot of direction if our clients are not obese, if our clients are relatively fit and lifting weights. So these next two studies are what we're really going to focus on, because they're using a population that is closely identifies to the types of clients that most of us work with. All right, the first one of these studies is referred to as the Matador study. And I'm going to use the word diet break. They used intermittent energy restriction. That was the terminology that they used in their study. Now, if we look at the top, there was about 6 weeks in both groups. There was 6 weeks of getting the subjects ready to start their diet. I want you to focus on the red bars in both the top and the bottom. The red bars are the weeks that they spent dieting. So both groups in this study, whether it was the diet break group, which is the top figure, or if it was the consecutive or the continuous dieting group, which is the bottom figure, both groups dieted for 12 weeks. If you look at the bottom, there was never a diet break during the 12 consecutive weeks of dieting. If you look at the top figure, there were 12 weeks of dieting, but every 3 weeks, the researchers inserted a 1 week diet break where the subjects increased their calories back to pre-study maintenance levels. So again, just like the Matador study, every subject dieted for the same length of time, but the groups getting diet breaks, they had a longer study intervention because the diet breaks added time to the total duration of the study. But what we're going to compare is 12 weeks of dieting in both groups. It's just that it took the diet break group 15 weeks to get to the point of dieting for 12 weeks because of their diet break periods of time. This was resistance trained males and females, approximately 30 years old. The extent of dieting was about 33%. So they reduced their calories by 33%. And during the diet breaks, they actually, while the researchers wanted them to get back to maintenance levels, they were actually still dieting just a little bit. On average, they were at approximately a 12% diet break. And one thing I really like about this study, they made sure that because they were resistance training and dieting, that they were eating an optimal amount of protein. So during all 12 weeks of dieting, plus during diet breaks in that group, they had them consume 2.3 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass, which is just a little bit over a gram per pound, which many of us would prescribe the same amounts. So before we look at the results, I want to clarify what I'm going to be giving you, and I'm going to be summarizing what happened to body composition after the 12th week of dieting. So in the diet break group, you'll see here, after their last week of dieting, after 12 weeks of dieting, I'm going to give you the results. But because there were 3 diet breaks that lasted 1 week, it was actually 15 weeks that they were in this diet phase. The bottom figure shows us what happened to, or when I'm going to provide the data here, I'm going to give you the data right after they were done with the 12 weeks of dieting, because the researchers gave them essentially 3 weeks post-diet of increased calories. And I'm not going to give you that. So I'm giving you the exact data after 12 weeks of dieting. And ultimately, the results were equivalent regardless of when you look at this. So here we have the body composition and metabolic rate outcomes. And let me just make a global statement. There was no differences in any of these variables, no statistically significant differences in any of these variables between the two groups, whether the subjects took diet breaks every 3 weeks or they just dieted straight across for 12 consecutive weeks. they lost approximately the same amount of body weight, the same amount of body fat, and they maintained or lost a minor amount of lean body mass during the study. And also resting metabolic rate was equivalent. So they both lost about 11% of their metabolic rate. If you were going to look specifically, a slight benefit to the diet break group with body fat percentage and overall fat mass. But again, it was not statistically significant. And when that happens, researchers and scientists just say it's equivalent. One other thing that the researchers did, which was pretty important, and I'm going to highlight this again in a few minutes. They also measured some psychological outcomes related to hunger. So two of the things that they measured that were subjective measures of hunger were hunger itself. So how hungry do these subjects feel? And another similar psychological variable was their desire to eat. And in both cases, the groups that were assigned to the diet break group, and remember, these were resistance trained males and females, when they didn't take diet breaks, they had significantly higher subjective feelings of hunger and a significantly higher subjective assessment of their desire to eat. So the way that I interpret this is they were more hungry and they felt like they wanted to eat more, significantly more than the other group. So if this study were extended for another 2 months, 4 months, or 6 months longer, I wouldn't be surprised if, because hunger was higher, that the subjects never taking diet breaks, if they were to not adhere to their diet as well and not lose as much weight. Because we can always appreciate whenever hunger is higher, you can beat hunger in the short term. But when you get hungry for long periods of time, several weeks after weeks, ultimately, in my opinion, that's when diets fail. That's when people stop adhering to these diets. So here were the conclusions of the authors. Essentially, diet breaks are effective. They're not any better and they're not any worse. And if you're not in any hurry to lose body weight, they may even be a better choice because of these psychological assessments of hunger.